Part 3, The Hidden Threat. A new problem arises. Lyra sat at the command console, her fingers flying over the controls as she ran another diagnostic scan. The ship was stable, for now. Jax's makeshift repairs had bought them some time, but she knew it was only a temporary solution. The Celestial Dawn needed proper repairs, and soon. Jax leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, watching her work. You know, for someone who just got her ship fixed, you don't look very happy. Lyra didn't look up. Your repairs are functional. But they are not a permanent solution. We need to reach a Krillian outpost for proper repairs. Jax shrugged. Hey, functional is better than dead in the water. Besides, I thought you'd be a little more grateful. I did save your life, after all. Lyra shot him a sharp look. You saved my ship. There is a difference. Jax held up his hands in mock surrender. Okay. Touchy subject. So, what's the plan, Captain Fancy? Set a course for the nearest outpost and hope they don't ask too many questions about the human who fixed your ship? Lyra hesitated. The thought of explaining Jax's presence to her superiors made her stomach twist. Krillian military protocol was strict, and they would not approve of a human tampering with their advanced technology. But what choice did she have? Before she could respond, the console beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. Lyra's blood ran cold. The signal was Krillian. The Krillian military arrives. Jax noticed her expression. Was that supposed to happen? No, Lyra said quickly, running a scan. The signal was coming from a Krillian military vessel, and it was closing in fast. She glanced at Jax, her mind racing. If the military found him here, they would detain him, or worse. Jax raised a brow. That bad, huh? Lyra didn't respond right away. She had expected to contact her people on her terms, after she had regained control of the situation. But now, the Krillian military had already detected her distress beacon. That meant they were coming, and they would have questions she wasn't ready to answer. We need to leave, she said finally, her voice tight. Jax blinked. Leave? I thought we were going to the outpost. Change of plans, Lyra said, already inputting new coordinates into the navigation system. The military cannot find you here. They will not understand. Jax frowned. Understand what? That I fixed your ship? Yes, Lyra said, her fingers flying over the controls. To them, you are an outsider. A contaminant. They will see only that a human tampered with Krillian technology, and they will not care that you saved my life. Jax crossed his arms. Well, that's not very grateful of them. Lyra shot him a look. This is not about gratitude. This is about protocol. And if we do not leave now, they will detain you, or worse. The neutral zone? Isn't that, like, pirate territory? It is unclaimed space, Lyra corrected. And it is our best option. Jax shrugged. Okay, Captain Fancy. Lead the way. A risky maneuver. Lyra set the course and activated the thrusters. The ship groaned in protest, but the engines held. For now. She glanced at the console, watching as the Krillian military vessel grew closer on the scanner. They didn't have much time. Jax leaned against the console, watching the screen. So, what's the plan if they catch up to us? They will not catch up to us, Lyra said, her voice firm. Jax raised a brow. You sure about that? Because they're moving pretty fast. Lyra didn't respond. She was already calculating the odds. The Celestial Dawn was faster than most Krillian vessels, but with its damaged systems, it was running at less than optimal speed. If the military vessel decided to pursue them, they would have to rely on Jax's repairs to hold. The console beeped again, signaling another incoming transmission. Lyra's stomach dropped. It was from the Krillian military vessel. Incoming transmission, the ship's AI announced. Lyra hesitated. If she ignored the transmission, it would only make her look more suspicious. But if she answered, she would have to explain Jax's presence. Jax noticed her hesitation. You gonna answer that? Lyra took a deep breath. I have no choice. She activated the transmission. The holographic screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of a Krillian military officer. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable. This is Commander Voss of the Krillian Stellar Fleet, he said, his voice cold and formal. Identify yourself and state your status. Lyra straightened, forcing herself to remain calm. This is Navigator Lyra of the Celestial Dawn. My ship suffered a system failure, but the situation is under control. I am en route to the nearest outpost for repairs. Commander Voss studied her for a moment. Your distress beacon was activated. Why? Lyra hesitated. It was a malfunction. The beacon has been deactivated. Commander Voss's eyes narrowed. A malfunction? Our scans indicate significant damage to your vessel. Are you certain you do not require assistance? Lyra's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I am certain. The damage is minor, and I am fully capable of handling the situation. Commander Voss didn't look convinced. Very well. Now, we hope they believe me. A narrow escape. The Celestial Dawn continued on its course, the Krillian military vessel lingering on the scanner. Lyra kept a close eye on their position, her fingers hovering over the controls. If they decided to pursue, she would have to act quickly. Jax leaned against the console, watching the screen. You think they'll follow us? I do not know, Lyra admitted. But we cannot take any chances. Jax nodded. Fair enough. So, what's the plan if they do? Lyra hesitated. If they pursue us, we will have to outmaneuver them. Jax raised a brow. Outmaneuver them? In this ship? Lyra's jaw tightened. The Celestial Dawn is faster than it looks. But we will need to be creative. Jax grinned. Creative, huh? I like the sound of that. Lyra didn't respond. Her mind was already racing, calculating the odds, planning their next move. She had always prided herself on following protocol, on doing things the Krillian way. But now, with Jax by her side, she was starting to realize that sometimes, rules were meant to be broken. Part 1, The Stranded Navigator. The silence of deep space. Lyra gripped the control panel of her starship, the Celestial Dawn, as it shuddered violently. The sleek, silver hull of the vessel trembled against the unforgiving void of deep space. Warning glyphs flashed across the console, their angry red and yellow lights painting the dim interior of the ship. The message was clear: catastrophic system failure. She flicked her wrist, summoning a holographic display that projected a three-dimensional model of the ship. The damage was extensive. The primary power core was fluctuating, the backup reactor had failed to activate, and the thrusters were completely dead. She was adrift, a tiny speck in the vast emptiness of space, hours away from the nearest Krillian outpost. A reluctant decision. Lyra exhaled sharply, forcing herself to remain calm. She was a trained navigator, an officer of the Krillian Stellar Fleet. Panic was for lesser beings. But as she ran through every possible recovery protocol, the realization settled in like a heavy weight. She was stranded. Her options were limited. She could wait for another Krillian ship to pass through the sector, but that was unlikely. Her people rarely ventured beyond their designated travel lanes. Or she could activate the emergency distress beacon and hope that whoever answered wasn't hostile. The thought made her stomach twist. She'd rather float in space forever than rely on some random outsider. But as the ship's systems continued to fail, she knew she had no choice. With a reluctant sigh, she keyed in the beacon frequency and watched as the signal pulsed outward. It was a universal distress call. Any ship within range would see it. The question was, who would respond? An unwelcome answer. The answer came faster than she expected. The console beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. Lyra straightened, bracing herself. The holographic screen flickered to life, displaying a small, boxy spacecraft hovering near her disabled vessel. It was an eyesore, a patchwork of mismatched metals and materials, with thrusters that belched blue-white exhaust in an inefficient plume. The design was crude, almost human. Then the voice came through. "Hey there, fancy ship. Looks like you're having a rough day." Lyra's stomach dropped. Of course, it had to be a human. She took a slow breath, fighting every urge to end the transmission immediately. "Identify yourself," she said, keeping her voice cold and formal. The screen flickered, revealing a man sitting in what could only be described as the least professional cockpit she had ever seen. There were food wrappers shoved into the corners, a half-empty cup labeled Galactic Brew, and most offensively, a plush toy of some unknown alien creature strapped to the console with duct tape. The human grinned. He was unshaven, wearing a grease-streaked flight suit that looked more functional than fashionable. His dark hair was a mess, and his eyes had the unmistakable glint of someone who found amusement in situations where amusement had no place. "The name's Jax," he said. "Licensed mechanic, independent contractor, and part-time hero. Lucky for you, I happened to be passing by." Lyra clenched her jaw. A mechanic. This had to be a joke. "I do not require a mechanic," she said, forcing herself to remain civil. "I require an engineer, someone trained in high-level starship diagnostics, preferably with a specialization in quantum drive restoration." Jax scratched his chin. "Huh. Well, I don't have any fancy degrees, but I did fix a hyperdrive with a car battery and a roll of wire once." Lyra stared at him. "That is not comforting." "Well, it worked," Jax said, shrugging. "Ship didn't explode or anything." "Well, not immediately." Her eye twitched. Jax clapped his hands together. "All right, how about this? Let me board, take a look at the damage, and if I can't fix it, I'll leave you alone and let you float in space like a really expensive paperweight. Deal?" Lyra exhaled slowly. She had two choices: accept assistance from an undignified, grease-covered human with what appeared to be the mechanical expertise of a junk trader, or drift in space until her oxygen reserves depleted. Neither option was ideal, but as she glanced at the failing systems, the dimming emergency lights, and the steadily dropping oxygen percentage, she knew what she had to do. "Fine," she said through clenched teeth. "You may board. But if you break anything, I will eject you into space." Jax grinned. "Lady, I promise I break things in a helpful way." Lyra groaned. She was going to regret this. Part 2, The Unlikely Savior. The Human's Arrival. Lyra stood near the airlock, arms crossed tightly, watching as the docking clamps engaged with a thunk that reverberated through the celestial dawn-stressed hull. She had activated the decontamination protocols because if she was going to let a human aboard her ship, the least she could do was ensure he didn't track in some primitive microbial disaster. A moment later, the airlock hissed, and the door slid open. Jack stepped through with the confidence of a man who had absolutely no right to be confident. His boots clanked against the sleek metallic flooring, and his eyes scanned the interior with a mixture of admiration and the barely restrained urge to touch everything. "Whoa," he whistled, taking in the curved architecture, the softly glowing consoles, and the nearly seamless blend of technology and artistry. "This is some fancy ship you got here. Real smooth design." Kind of like a luxury space yacht, but you know, more alien. Lyra's brow twitched. This is a Krillian reconnaissance vessel, not a space yacht. Jax turned to her, clearly horrified. Wait, are you telling me your species, who apparently mastered faster-than-light travel, never thought of inventing cup holders? Lyra narrowed her eyes. Our vessels are designed for efficiency, not frivolous accessories. Jax let out a dramatic sigh and shook his head. And yet you call humans primitive. Before she could respond with something scathing, he clapped his hands together. All right, show me the patient, Doc. Where's the damage? Lyra exhaled through her nose and motioned toward the primary control hub. Jax followed, his gaze darting between the intricate control panels and the floating holographic displays that projected the ship's dire status. The improvised repair. All right, let's see what we got here, Jax muttered, rubbing his hands together like a man about to perform a questionable science experiment. He leaned in, inspecting the warning glyphs on the console. He tapped at one of them. Nothing happened. He tapped again, harder. Still nothing. Lyra watched him with mounting horror. What are you doing? Seeing if it's a touchscreen, Jax said. Turns out it's not. Noted. Lyra took a slow, calming breath. It operates on neural synchronization. Only registered crew members can. Before she could finish, Jax pulled something out of his flight suit, a small, rusty screwdriver. He popped off a sleek, seemingly seamless panel with all the grace of someone peeling the lid off a tin can. Lyra actually gasped. What are you doing? Diagnostics, Jax said, peering into the now exposed circuitry. Oof, that's a lot of nanofiber wiring. I bet this whole thing runs on some kind of organic quantum hybrid tech, huh? Yes, Lyra said, still in shock. How did you? Jax waggled his fingers. Oh, you know, educated guess. Also, this part right here? It's fried. Lyra snapped out of her disbelief and stepped forward. That's impossible. Krillian circuits are designed to self-regulate. They don't simply fry. Jax reached into the exposed panel and yanked out a small, charred component, holding it up with a smug expression. Then explain this little piece of cosmic toast. Lyra's mouth opened, then closed. She reached out, took the burnt-out piece from him, and studied it in disbelief. He was right. The quantum relay was completely fried, its microscopic neural filaments seared beyond recognition. That should not have happened, she said, struggling to find the words. Yeah, well, should not and did are best friends in my line of work, Jax said, rolling up his sleeves. Lucky for you, I've got a fix. Lyra frowned. You carry Krillian quantum relays on your vessel? Jax scoffed. No, but I do have something that'll work just as well. Before she could stop him, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of copper wiring. Lyra stared. That is not a quantum relay. Jax grinned. Nope, but with a little tweaking, it will be. Lyra could only watch in horrified fascination as Jax stripped the insulation from the wire, twisted it into an intricate shape, and then produced a tiny multi-tool that hummed as he soldered the makeshift connection. You're improvising, the words fell out of her mouth as if they physically hurt. Jax winked. Yep. That is not how Krillian engineering works. Well, it's how human engineering works, Jax said. And if it makes you feel better, I promise not to use any duct tape. Yet. Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose. This was the worst day of her life. The moment of truth. Jax finished attaching the wire and shoved the panel back into place. He gave it a firm smack for good measure. The ship whined, then miraculously, some of the failing systems flickered back to life. The control displays stabilized, the power readings climbed from dire to concerning but livable, and the thrusters hummed with restored function. Lyra blinked. It worked. Jax dusted off his hands. Oh yeah, it'll hold. Probably. You'll need a proper replacement eventually, but for now, you're not going to drift into oblivion. She stared at him, re-evaluating everything she knew about humans. And then he ruined the moment. So, what's next? Want me to fix your thrusters too, or do you still think I'm some primitive monkey? Lyra exhaled sharply. One successful repair does not make you a miracle worker. Jax grinned. Yeah, well, give me an hour. You might change your mind. Part 4, The Escape Plan. The chase begins. Lyra's hands tightened on the controls as the Celestial Dawn surged forward, its engines humming with renewed energy. The Krillian military vessel was still on their tail, its sleek, angular form cutting through the void of space with alarming speed. Lyra's heart pounded as she monitored their progress, her mind racing through every possible maneuver to shake their pursuers. Jax leaned against the console, his arms crossed as he watched the scanner. So, how long do you think we can keep this up? Not long, Lyra admitted, her voice tight. The Celestial Dawn is faster, but with the damage to our systems, we cannot maintain this speed indefinitely. Jax raised a brow. So, what's the plan? We can't just keep running. Lyra hesitated. The plan was risky, but it was their only option. We need to lose them in the asteroid field. Jax blinked. The asteroid field? You mean the one that's, like, a death trap for anyone who isn't a crazy good pilot? Lyra shot him a look. I am a crazy good pilot. Jax grinned. All right, Captain Fancy. Let's do this. A risky maneuver. Lyra adjusted the ship's course, steering them toward the dense asteroid field that loomed ahead. The Krillian military vessel followed, its thrusters flaring as it closed the distance. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, her eyes locked on the scanner. Hold on, she said, her voice calm but firm. Jax grabbed onto the console as the ship lurched, narrowly avoiding a massive asteroid. The Celestial Dawn weaved through the field, its engines roaring as Lyra pushed them to their limits. The Krillian vessel followed, but its larger size made it less maneuverable, and it struggled to keep up. Jax let out a low whistle. You weren't kidding about being a good pilot. Lyra didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the task at hand. The asteroid field was a chaotic maze of spinning rocks and debris, each one a potential threat. But Lyra navigated it with precision, her movements swift and calculated. The Krillian vessel fired a warning shot, the energy blast narrowly missing the Celestial Dawn. Lyra's jaw tightened. They are not going to let us go easily. Jax glanced at the scanner. Yeah, no kidding. Any chance we can lose them in here? Possibly, Lyra said, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. If we can make it through there, we might be able to lose them. Jax followed her gaze. That gap looks pretty tight. You sure we can fit? We will fit, Lyra said, her voice firm. Jax raised a brow. Okay, but if we get stuck, I'm blaming you. Lyra didn't respond. She adjusted the ship's trajectory, aiming for the narrow gap. The Celestial Dawn shot forward, its hull scraping against the asteroids as it squeezed through. The ship groaned in protest, but Lyra held her course, her hands steady on the controls. Behind them, the Krillian vessel hesitated, its larger frame unable to follow. Lyra allowed herself a small smile as they emerged on the other side, the military vessel disappearing from the scanner. A moment of relief. Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Okay, that was insane. But hey, it worked. Lyra nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. We are not out of danger yet. We need to put as much distance between us and them as possible. Jax glanced at the scanner. Yeah, but where are we going? We can't just keep running forever. Lyra hesitated. The neutral zone was still their best option, but it was a long way off. And with the Celestial Dawn's damaged systems, they couldn't afford to push the ship too hard. We need to find a safe place to make repairs, she said finally. Somewhere the Krillian military cannot find us. Jax raised a brow. You mean like a hidden base or something? Lyra shook her head. No, but there are places in the neutral zone where we can lay low. Places where the Krillian military does not go. Jax nodded. Okay, so we find one of those places, fix the ship, and then what? Lyra hesitated. Then, we figure out what to do next. Jax grinned. Sounds like a plan. But first, let's get out of here. A new threat. As the Celestial Dawn continued on its course, Lyra kept a close eye on the scanner. The Krillian military vessel was no longer following them, but that didn't mean they were safe. The neutral zone was a dangerous place, filled with pirates, scavengers, and other unsavory characters. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden beep from the console. She frowned, her eyes narrowing as she studied the scanner. There is another ship approaching. Jax leaned over, his brow furrowing as he looked at the screen. That doesn't look like a Krillian vessel. Lyra's stomach dropped. The ship on the scanner was small and fast, its design unfamiliar. But one thing was clear, it was heading straight for them. Pirates, Lyra said, her voice tight. Jax raised a brow. Pirates? In the neutral zone? No way. Lyra shot him a look. This is not a joke. If they catch us, we are in serious trouble. Jax held up his hands. Okay. So, what's the plan? We can't outrun them, can we? Lyra hesitated. The Celestial Dawn was faster, but with its damaged systems, it was no match for a pirate vessel. And with the Krillian military still searching for them, they couldn't afford to draw any more attention. We need to hide, Lyra said finally. Jax blinked. Hide? Where? Lyra's eyes scanned the scanner, searching for a solution. Then she spotted it, a nearby nebula, its swirling clouds of gas and dust providing the perfect cover. There, she said, pointing to the nebula on the screen. If we can make it there, we can lose them in the interference. Jax nodded. Okay, let's do it. Into the nebula. Lyra adjusted the ship's course, steering them toward the nebula. The pirate vessel followed, its thrusters flaring as it closed the distance. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, her eyes locked on the scanner. Hold on, she said, her voice calm but firm. Jax grabbed onto the console as the ship lurched, the nebula's swirling clouds enveloping them. The Celestial Dawn shuddered as it entered the dense gas, the interference scrambling the scanner. Lyra's hands tightened on the controls as she navigated through the nebula, her movements swift and calculated. The pirate vessel followed, but its sensors were no match for the nebula's interference, and it quickly lost track of the Celestial Dawn. Jax let out a low whistle. Okay, that was impressive. You sure you're not part human? Lyra shot him a look. Do not push your luck, human. Jax grinned. Just saying, you've got some serious skills. Lyra didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the task at hand. The nebula was a dangerous place, its swirling clouds hiding countless hazards. But Lyra navigated it with precision, her movements swift and calculated. Finally, they emerged on the other side, the pirate vessel nowhere to be seen. Lyra allowed herself a small smile as she checked the scanner. They were safe, for now. A moment of reflection. Jax leaned back against the console, letting out a breath. Okay, so we lost the pirates. Now what? Lyra hesitated. The neutral zone was still their best option, but it was a long way off. And with the Celestial Dawn's damaged systems, they couldn't afford to push the ship too hard. "We need to find a safe place to make repairs," she said finally. "Somewhere the Krillian military cannot find us." Jax nodded. "Okay, so we find one of those places, fix the ship, and then what?" Lyra hesitated. "Then, we figure out what to do next." Jax grinned. "Sounds like a plan. But first, let's get out of here."